stuffed inside a suitcase, hands and feet bound, dumped on the side of Glenville Road.
My daughter did not deserve whatever you did to her. My daughter was pure.
When a monster comes and takes your daughter away or your child away, for what? For what? You know, it's not only hurt, it's hate.
In the late hours of January the 28th, 2019, Valerie Reyes was awake in her basement apartment in New Rochelle, New York. She had just told her mother something that would haunt the family forever. She said that she was afraid someone was going to get her. She did not say who. She did not explain why. She only said that she was scared. That same night, miles away in Flushing, Queens, a man was also awake. Security cameras would later show him leaving his home close to midnight. He was dressed in dark clothing. He was carrying nothing unusual. He was alone. At that moment, nobody knew that these two timelines were actually moving towards each other, converging in a nightmare. Valerie's fears were not reported to the police. The man's movements did not raise suspicions. There was nothing on the surface that seemed to demand intervention. But within hours, Valerie would vanish. And within just days, investigators would be forced to piece together two separate nights as one single chain of events. In this video, I will share with you 9 unbelievable details that makes this case truly disturbing. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing. Now for today's silly little question. Do you like these silly little questions, or do they need to go? Let me know down in the comments. Now, on with the video. Valerie Reyes was 24. She rented a small basement apartment on Colonial Place. She worked as a sales associate at the Barnes & Noble store in Eastchester. Co-workers described her as reliable and well-liked. Her family described her as gentle, creative, and deeply compassionate. Valerie loved drawing and portrait art. She had ambitions of becoming a tattoo artist. One of her brothers was learning to tattoo, and Valerie even allowed him to practice his designs on her. And that level of trust spoke volumes. Because Valerie was close with her family, she spoke regularly with her parents and her siblings. Sundays were often reserved for family time. Those routines were consistent enough that deviations were immediately noticeable to everyone. Valerie also lived with anxiety and depression. Those struggles were not hidden from her family. The situation was manageable. But what made late January of 2019 different was the intensity of her fears and anxieties. On January the 28th, Valerie told her mother that she was experiencing anxiety attacks. She said that she felt paranoid. She said that she was afraid that somebody was going to end her. From an investigative standpoint, statements like that were important because they established a state of mind. It could mean that her fears were based on evidence. At the time though, there was no actionable information. Valerie did not name a person. She did not describe a threat. She was not overtly asking for help or protection. Later that night, Valerie spoke with her best friend, Jeffrey Anderson. The conversation focused on her anxiety, but it didn't seem to give many clues as to what would happen next. There was no indication that she planned to leave town, nor any indication that she was planning to meet anyone. Her last known phone call ended at around 11:30 p.m. From a timeline perspective, that moment becomes a real reference point. Everything after it must be reconstructed without Valerie. Within just hours, Valerie would stop responding entirely. At the time, nobody knew that this would be the last ordinary night of her life. On February the 5th, 2019, highway workers were conducting a routine sweep in Greenwich, Connecticut. The area was along Glenville Road, about 15 to 20 feet from the roadway. They noticed a red suitcase in a wooded area. This suitcase obviously did not belong there. One of the workers approached it and opened it. Emergency services were then contacted immediately. When police arrived, they confirmed that a woman's body was inside the case. Her hands and feet were bound. Packing tape was wrapped around her mouth and chin. She was barefoot. Due to the winter temperatures, her body was partially frozen. Investigators secured the area and they began documenting the scene. Because the body was found in Connecticut, the case initially fell under Connecticut jurisdiction. However, a missing persons report had originated in New York. This interstate split triggered federal involvement. The Connecticut medical examiner later determined that the cause of demise was homicidal asphyxiation. The victim was identified as Valerie Reyes. The investigation shifted rapidly. What had been a simple disappearance was now a confirmed homicide. The location that she was found answered one question, but it raised many more.
Chris and Mary, it's been an emotional time for loved ones who were holding on to hope after Valerie Reyes went missing, only to learn about a week later that she wouldn't be returning home. And now many in this community are hoping for justice as police continue the relentless search for those responsible. Friends and family gathered in this time of grief at a candlelight vigil at Glen Island Park last night, together mourning the loss of 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. Friends describe her as sweet and loving. On January 29th, Reyes didn't show up for work at an Eastchester Barnes & Noble. She also couldn't be found in her basement apartment in New Rochelle. A week later on Tuesday, a gruesome discovery was made in Greenwich, Connecticut. Reyes's body was found stuffed inside a suitcase, hands and feet bound, dumped on the side of Glenville Road.
I was praying that wasn't her in the suitcase. I was praying her family would have her back. She's the oldest sibling. What it is to lose your firstborn, I wouldn't be able to live with myself.
I just hope they catch whoever did it so this doesn't happen again. It's tough.
Police are trying to get to the bottom of this, reconstructing the victim's movements since she went missing. She may have spent time in Manhattan. Sources say Reyes was feeling anxious after breaking up with a boyfriend. Now, an autopsy is complete, but authorities have not released the cause of death. They say they've gotten a multitude of tips and ask you continue to bring in any information you may have. We're live in New Rochelle. Jenna DeAngelis, CBS 2 News.
All right, Jenna, thank you so much.
Once Valerie Reyes was identified, investigators began working backwards from the evidence trail. ATM footage was reviewed frame by frame. The vehicle seen near the bank was traced to a rental company in Flushing, Queens. Rental records showed that the black Honda had been rented out during the exact window of Valerie's disappearance. The individual who rented the vehicle was questioned. That person was ruled out. However, the rental agreement listed additional authorized drivers. One of those names was Javier Enrique de Silva Rojas. Javier de Silva was also 24 years old in January of 2019. He lived in a condominium in Flushing, Queens. He was originally from Venezuela, and he also had Portuguese citizenship. He studied journalism at a Catholic university in Caracas. Caracas is the capital city of Venezuela, by the way. And whilst I'm on a quick tangent, I just want to say if you can hear a kind of tapping or clicking noise at all in this video. Can you hear that? I don't know. There's a bird that's moved into my roof and I don't really know what to do. So I think it's making a nest or destroying a house. I don't know. On with the case. In 2017, Javier travelled to the United States under a visa waiver program. That program allowed him to stay for a limited period. When that time expired though, he did not leave. This means that by early 2019, Javier was in the United States unlawfully. In New York, Javier worked a series of ordinary jobs. He was employed by a cleaning company. Later, he worked as a barista at a coffee shop. To those around him, he just appeared normal and stable. On social media, he presented himself as thoughtful and artistic. His accounts were filled with travel photos, city scenes, and images of nature. Friends and acquaintances described him as kind and helpful. Some said that he had gone out of his way to assist others when they were struggling. From the outside, there was nothing unusual about Javier, apart from overstaying his visa. There was also no known criminal history, again apart from the visa thing. And there was nothing nothing really that stood out about him at all. People who blend in rarely draw immediate attention in any situation, but personal perception and private behaviour are not the same thing. Later, detectives would learn that at least one person viewed Javier in a very different way. Valerie's own mother, she did not trust him. She described him as controlling and manipulative during the time that Javier was in a relationship with Valerie. Those concerns, though, were not documented officially at the time. They would only start to gain weight after Valerie disappeared.
We had hope that she would come back. From what we last knew, she was in the city. And that's all we knew, that she was in the city, so we thought she was looking for help.
My daughter did not deserve whatever you did to her. My daughter was pure.
Everyone that met Valerie loved her. These past few days I've been getting messages from people that met Valerie, that worked with Valerie, and they all told me what a wonderful person she has been to them.
Sooner or later he will get caught. I know it.
Valerie Reyes and Javier de Silva met in 2018 through a dating app. They dated for approximately 3 months. The relationship, though, did not progress the way that Javier had wanted it to. In April of 2018, Valerie made the decision to end the relationship. From her perspective, it was done, it was over. From Javier's perspective, though, it was not. After the breakup, he continued to attempt contact. Valerie was not reciprocating. In fact, she blocked him on social media, and she avoided all direct communication. When Javier reached out again, Valerie insisted that any contact they may have must go through friends first. In September of 2018, Javier contacted Valerie, claiming he had accidentally used her debit card. He said that he wanted to reimburse her. Valerie once again refused to engage with him directly. She told friends that she did not want any contact. After this point, it appeared that communication stopped altogether. So on paper, this relationship was history, it was forgotten. By January of 2019, nearly 9 months had passed since the breakup. Investigatively speaking, former short-time partners from that far back are often deprioritized. More recent relationships usually receive attention first. At the time that Valerie vanished, she had in fact recently ended a different relationship. That breakup had occurred just days earlier. So from a procedural standpoint, that fact initially carried more weight. Javier was not immediately treated as a primary suspect. There was no active disputes. There was no known recent contact. There was no outward sign that he was still involved in Valerie's life. But would that assumption last? Okay, update, I just banged on the ceiling and the bird stopped pecking, so maybe some peace and quiet. Let's see. On February the 6th, one day after Valerie's body was discovered, Javier then returned to the rental company. He re-rented that same black Honda. Location data from his phone showed a concentrated cluster of signals at a car wash in the Bronx. He then returned the vehicle once again. This was obviously suspicious. People do not typically rent a vehicle solely to clean it before returning it. That behavior suggested an attempt to remove trace evidence. On February the 11th, 2019, Javier was arrested in Flushing, Queens. The arrest was made on financial charges that could be immediately supported. This allowed investigators to search his residence. Inside his wallet, officers found Valerie's debit card. They also found her driver's license. Javier initially offered false explanations. He claimed that he had found Valerie's wallet. He claimed that he had not seen her in over a year. Digital records, though, they contradicted his claims. On the evening of January the 28th, 2019, Javier de Silva rented a black Honda from a garage in Flushing, Queens. That rental was logged under a short window of time. At approximately 10:50 p.m., security cameras then captured Javier leaving his residence. He was dressed in dark clothing. He was wearing black Adidas sneakers with white soles. He got into the rental vehicle alone. Rental records like this often become critical in missing persons cases, especially if it's not something that the person would normally do. It does a few other things as well. It establishes the fact that a suspect is now mobile, and it can also give a precise window of time. It's this narrow window that investigators can then test against other data. So, Javier drove out of Queens towards Westchester County. In the early hours of January the 29th, his phone location data placed him in New Rochelle. More specifically, it placed him within roughly 200 feet of Valerie Reyes' apartment. Shortly after arriving in that area, Javier then switched his phone to airplane mode. And if you didn't know, that action stopped location tracking and data transmission. It kind of makes you digitally invisible. It's unlikely that someone would disable their digital footprint during just an ordinary visit. So, at this point, things aren't looking too good for Javier. He then entered Valerie's apartment. There is no evidence that anyone else was there. So, as far as we know, it was Javier and Valerie in her apartment alone. And from that point forward, Valerie Reyes was never seen by anyone else again.
A funeral is being held today in New Rochelle for the woman whose body was found stuffed in a suitcase on the side of a road in Greenwich, Connecticut. Family and friends gathered at St. Gabriel's Church to say goodbye to 24-year-old Valerie Reyes. Her ex-boyfriend is under arrest and charged with her murder. Sources say Javier de Silva of Flushing, Queens, told police he killed Reyes at her home a week ago. They briefly dated last year until Reyes broke up with him.
Inside the apartment, a violent altercation occurred. Valerie suffered multiple injuries to her head and face. These included bruising, fractures, and a large hematoma on her forehead. The pattern of injuries indicated repeated force. Small amounts of red DNA were later found in the apartment. Stains were also located on the bathroom floor, with another on the toilet. The relatively limited quantity of this red DNA suggested that the scene had been partially cleaned or otherwise covered whilst what happened. At some point after the attack, Valerie was then restrained. Her hands were bound with packing tape and twine. Her feet were bound the same way. Multiple layers of packing tape were wrapped over her mouth. So Valerie was now completely incapacitated. Anything that happened from that point forwards, she had no control over. Valerie was then placed in a red suitcase. She was still alive when this happened. Forensic findings later confirmed this. That red suitcase did belong to Valerie. It was not something that the perpetrator brought in from outside. So this may suggest that what happened was not planned. After Valerie was placed in the suitcase, she was removed from the apartment. With the real damage already done, the perpetrator's next moves would determine just how far they were willing to go. Still, at this point, to the outside world, Valerie had simply stopped answering her phone. In the hours after Valerie was removed from her apartment, financial activity began appearing on her accounts. At approximately 5 a.m. on January the 29th, her debit card was used at an ATM in New Rochelle. $1,000 was withdrawn. ATM surveillance footage captured a hooded individual wearing dark clothing. The person arrived alone and left immediately after the withdrawal. This financial activity becomes another timestamp. It shows that Valerie was no longer in control of her accounts. It also creates a traceable trail that does not rely on eyewitnesses. Over the following days, Valerie's debit card was used multiple more times. It was used so much that the total amount withdrawn reached approximately $5,350. At the same time, Valerie's phone activity changed. Her phone was placed into airplane mode. Digital logs showed that her iCloud account had been accessed. Her banking app was also accessed using biometric authorization. So, whoever did this, they were still in close proximity to Valerie. In addition to the unlawful use of her bank accounts and phone, Valerie's iPad was also removed from her apartment. It was then later sold. Each of these actions occurred after Valerie's time on this earth had already ended. All of this information together really narrows down the pool of suspects. Bank transactions record times. Cameras record faces. Digital footprints. Do not forget. Now confronted with the evidence, his story changed. He admitted that she was alive when he placed her in the suitcase. So, now the case went from solely relying on evidence to having an actual admission. Because Valerie was transported across state lines, The case then proceeded in federal court. Javier de Silva was charged with kidnapping, resulting in death. The charge carried the possibility of life in prison or the death penalty.
And Diana, as you can well imagine, the family is grief-stricken, but at the same time, they are somewhat relieved as a result of this arrest. The suspect was arraigned just a short while ago down in White Plains. He's being charged with kidnapping, resulting in death. Now, because of various interstate aspects of the case, he is being charged by federal authorities.
I know a lot of people are going to be relieved knowing that there's, this monster, that they caught him already.
Preparing for her daughter's wake, Norma Sanchez is grief-stricken, but at least relieved. Police have arrested Valerie Reyes' ex-boyfriend, Javier de Silva.
My heart dropped. It's like emotions of so much anger and hate, but relieved.
Police from Greenwich and New Rochelle, where Reyes lived, worked the case and arrested de Silva in Queens Monday night.
This same suspect was interviewed jointly by Greenwich and New Rochelle detectives and admitted a role in the death of Valerie Reyes.
He is accused of fraudulently using Reyes' ATM card after she had gone missing. De Silva will be arraigned on federal charges brought by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Due to the complexity of the interstate nature of the crimes.
Valerie Reyes had been missing 9 days until Monday a week ago, when police in Greenwich found her body, hands and feet bound and stuffed in a suitcase here along Glenville Road. Norma Sanchez said she had only met the ex-boyfriend once before.
When a monster comes and takes your daughter away or your child away, for what? For what? It's not only hurt, it's hate.
In February of 2020, Javier pled guilty. He entered the plea in White Plains Federal Court. The plea both acknowledged the kidnapping and Valerie's end. In September of 2020, sentencing was imposed. Javier de Silva received a sentence of 360 months in federal prison. He was also sentenced to 2 years of supervised release. Under the federal system, there is no parole. He will be well into his 50s before he is eligible for release. Following completion of his sentence, he is expected to then be deported. At sentencing, Valerie's mother addressed the court. She spoke about the daughter that she had lost, and she spoke directly to the man responsible.
A 30-year prison sentence for the man who killed Valerie Reyes, the New Rochelle woman who disappeared from her home in January of 2019.
A judge called Javier de Silva evil and his crime sickening. CBS 2's Tony Aiello was in the courtroom.
Norma Sanchez left the U.S. courthouse in White Plains after an emotional courtroom confrontation, crying as she described her beautiful daughter as someone who brought joy to those who knew her, and directly addressing the man who killed Valerie, telling Javier de Silva he was a worthless soul. You deserve nothing but pain and rejection. De Silva, briefly her boyfriend, had taped her mouth and bound her hands, leaving her to die. He raided her bank account, stole her iPad, and traded it for electronics he showed off with in this picture. He lied to investigators, claiming he panicked after Valerie fell before admitting guilt last year to a federal crime, causing death during a kidnapping. De Silva looks different than the pictures we have. He has cut his hair and shaved his beard. Even with a mask on in court, you could tell he was sobbing through much of the proceeding. De Silva is a Venezuelan national who was in the U.S. illegally. He spoke in court in Spanish, quote, "I will never forgive myself. I cannot ask Valerie's family to forgive me." The defense team submitted letters and photos to show De Silva had good qualities at odds with his terrible crime. Judge Vincent Persetti did not buy it, saying, quote, "This is not a good person. This is an evil person." There is no parole in the federal system. Javier de Silva will be well into his 50s before he's released from federal prison. At the U.S. courthouse in White Plains, Tony Aiello, CBS 2 News.
The judge described the crime as brutal, callous and cruel, and so, with the sentence imposed, the legal case was ended. But for Valerie's family, the impact will never be over. Valerie was right to not feel safe. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.